Today marks 5 years since the January 6th riot at the Capitol. There's no official event to mark the anniversary, but House Democrats met this morning to highlight what they call ongoing threats to elections and public safety.
Meantime, President Trump spoke about the events from that day as well, saying he had intended only for his supporters to go peacefully and patriotically to confront Congress as it certified former President Biden's win. Marched on the U.S. Capitol, forcing lawmakers and their staff to scramble for safety, with some crouching under desks and others donning gas masks. All the while, Capitol Police tried to barricade the building. One of those forced to seek shelter, Congressman Richard Neal, who, along with several others, used a large table to barricade themselves inside his office.
And we all picked up this table, including some women. This table was really massive, but you have that kind of flow of adrenaline at a moment like that, because there's a window in the back and they broke through the window. So they were at us from the east and the west sides of the office space.
Congressman Neal also telling Western Mass News how Capitol Police were there with them, helping defend the space. Now, earlier today in Washington, about 100 people also gathered to retrace the rioters' steps from the White House to the Capitol to honor those who died in the riot and its aftermath.